The dark and disturbing manga iceberg? Let's go. Ajin. Ajin is a very interesting manga. The story follows Kei Nagai, a seemingly ordinary high school student who is suddenly hit and killed by a truck, only to resurrect moments later, and discovers that he is an Ajin, a rare immortal human who can regenerate infinitely, and then is proceeded to be hunted and experimented on by the government. The public views these Ajins as dangerous monsters, so of course Kei becomes a fugitive, and forced to confront the horrifying reality of what being an Ajin means. The manga can be very, very dark at some points. Ajin are sought after and captured by the government, and are subjected to endless and graphic tests, such as dissection, electrocution, limb removal, and even execution, since they can revive instantly. The scenes can be pretty brutal and clinical, and are used to emphasize just how easily society dehumanizes those that it fears. And our main character is not the good guy. I would say he's more of an anti-hero. He's cold and calculating and self-serving, and is just threading the line between human and monster. And since these Ajins can regenerate, you will see a lot of that throughout the manga. Bodies explode, heal, and are mutilated repeatedly at multiple points. Death means nothing in this manga, and is instead replaced by a loop of physical suffering. I Am a Hero. I Am a Hero follows Hideo Suzuki, a failed manga artist in his mid-30s struggling with mental illness, hallucinations, and self-loathing. His mundane life, where he feels like he's a supporting character in his own life, suddenly collapses when a mysterious infection spreads across Japan, turning people into violent, zombie-like creatures. And as the manga goes on, sometimes we even begin to question our own main character. His unstable mind makes the reader constantly question what's real. He constantly converses with imaginary figures, and his neurotic inner monologue blurs the line between sanity and delusion. And the violence that we see in the manga is nothing to scoff at. The infection scenes are graphic, detailed, and surprisingly grounded in anatomy. Victims mutate grotesquely, faces split open, eyes bulge, and bodies twist unnaturally. It's not supposed to be a pleasant Hollywood movie, it's supposed to be just raw. And of course, like any zombie story, you have to deal with the collapse of morality. Eventually, the survivors become as monstrous as the infected. You have looting, assaults, and a certain word that starts with R. And the title, I Am a Hero, is kind of ironic. Our main character isn't brave or noble. He's just a terrified man trying to do what he can to survive. King of Thorns. King of Thorns takes place in a world plagued by a mysterious, incurable virus called Medusa, which slowly turns the victims into stone. A group of infected individuals was chosen for an experimental cryogenic sleep program in hopes of finding a cure in the future. But when they awake, they find that the facility has been overrun by massive thorny vines and monstrous creatures. With no contact from the outside world, they have to navigate the labyrinth ruins while trying to understand what happened and whether they truly woke up or not. And the thing that makes this manga rather creepy is that the survivors rapidly lose trust in each other. Of course, they're going to argue and panic, but they very quickly start to betray one another as the environment becomes more surreal. What starts off as a survival horror evolves into psychological breakdown as hallucinations and memories all begin to blur. And one of the most unsettling aspects is how the manga plays with reality itself. You're never sure what's real, or who actually survived, or who's dreaming, or even what Medusa truly is. And this structure creates a sense of dread that builds all the way up until the manga's ending. Now, it's not an incredibly dark or disturbing manga, hence why it's on tier 1, but it's still a good survival manga that will have you questioning who you can trust. Ikigami. This manga takes place in a near-future dystopian Japan, where the government enforces a law called the National Welfare Act. Each citizen receives an inoculation in childhood, but 1 out of every 2,000 contains a nanocapsule that will activate sometime between ages 18 and 24, killing the recipient instantly. And the purpose of this? To make society value life. The story follows Kengo Fujimoto, a civil servant whose job it is to deliver death notices, or Ikigami, to those randomly selected to die. He must inform each person 24 hours before their scheduled death, so they can appreciate their final day. Each chapter follows a different recipient, an aspiring singer, a bullied student, a disgraced soldier, a desperate mother, as they all face their last 24 hours. And their reactions vary wildly. Revenge, forgiveness, rebellion, quiet acceptance. Between cases, Fujimoto begins questioning the morality of the system he serves, and risks being labeled a traitor to the state. The story isn't about serial killers, curses. It's about a dystopian future, where society learns to live with killing their own kind. The victims aren't villains. They're just ordinary people whose lives are cut short for no reason. Just regular people like you or me. There's no grand conspiracy or anything like that. Just a government that weaponizes fear to maintain control, and citizens too afraid to question it. Hellstar Remina. Hellstar Remina is a short manga written by Junji Ito. The story begins when Dr. Oguro, an astronomer, discovers a mysterious new planet that suddenly emerges from a wormhole. He ends up naming it Remina after his daughter, and this discovery immediately makes Remina a global celebrity. But not for long. Soon after that, the planet begins to consume stars and galaxies, and is moving rapidly towards Earth. As panic begins to spread, the public turns from worship to hatred, blaming the girl for the coming apocalypse. And she very soon becomes the target of humanity's fear and madness as society begins to collapse. Not only does this manga have to deal with cosmic horror, the planet Remina is a literal cosmic predator. It's a sentient, devouring world. And just the idea of the unknowable, a giant planet that feeds on entire galaxies, is horrifying, because how would you ever stop that? But the way that the planet is drawn definitely can send a shiver up your back. But the most disturbing part of this manga is just the way society immediately collapses. As the planet approaches Earth, everyone just loses their mind. People start believing that this girl is cursed, a witch who brought the apocalypse. Crowds immediately form cults and mobs lynch survivors. And there's no buildup, it just happens. Cities immediately collapse, and once that planet gets there, the Earth twists apart and the skies burn, as Remina devours the planet. There's no salvation. It's just pure hopelessness. No matter what happens, the extinction is coming. All You Need Is Kill. All You Need Is Kill is a pretty good death loop manga. The story takes place with humanity being at war with an alien species called the Mimics, amorphous creatures that are wiping out Earth's armies. The protagonist, Keiji Kiriya, is a new recruit who dies in his very first battle, only to awaken the day before his death, alive again. Trapped in a time loop, he is forced to relive the same bloody day over and over and over again. Each cycle, he becomes a better soldier though, but also loses a little bit more of his humanity in the process. And he does a lot of testing in the cycle. At some points, he just immediately resorts to killing himself. But every loop begins with Keiji's brutal death, and the manga depicts these deaths pretty graphically. Impalement, explosion, dismemberment, and the disturbing part just doesn't lie with the violence, but the repetition. He experiences the same pain, trauma, and terror thousands of times. Death eventually just stops holding any weight whatsoever. And at first, Keiji during all this is horrified, but eventually he becomes numb and then addicted. And watching him shift from a naive soldier to an emotional killing machine is kind of what makes this so chilling. It's a man stripped of hope and empathy by the loop, and a living weapon whose only skill is to kill. Blood on the Tracks. Blood on the Tracks has to be one of the greatest psychological horror mangas of all time. The story follows Seichi, an awkward middle school boy living with his father and his overly loving mother, Seiko. At first, she seems like an ideal parent, devoted, protective, and gentle. But slowly, that affection begins to feel wrong. Too intimate, too invasive, and too controlling. The moment that changes everything comes very early in the series. On a family hike, Seiko pushes Seichi's cousin Shigeru off a cliff. And from that point onward, the manga takes a huge turn. Seiko's love for her son is suffocating, so deep that it crosses every emotional and psychological boundary. Her behavior blurs the line between motherly care and possessive control, manipulating Seichi into emotional dependency and fear. And I'm not talking about like yandere love interest type vibes, I'm talking about legit mental illness, crazy person vibes. Seiko isolates her son. She guilt trips him, rewrites events, and turns love into a cage. She's taking gaslighting to the extreme and is willing to do literally anything. Emotionally, a lot of people can find this to be a very hard manga to read. The story isn't about monsters outside the home, but the horror is realizing that the monster is right next to you all along. Freesia. Freesia is a rather interesting manga that was made in the early 2000s. In a future version of Japan, society has legalized revenge killings. If someone is murdered, the victim's family can legally appoint a proxy to kill the murderer. These executions are managed by a government-sanctioned agency that sends out licensed enforcers. The story centers on Kano, one of these enforcers, a quiet, emotionless man with a detached stare and a broken mind. He works for the agency, hunting targets assigned to him. But as the series unfolds, we realize that Kano isn't just stoic, he's psychotic. He experiences hallucinations, emotional dissociation, and repressed trauma, blurring the line between his mission and his crumbling perception of reality. The story spirals between hyper-real violence, dark bureaucracy, and surreal dream imagery. Other enforcers, like the unhinged Higuchi or the unstable profiler Aizawa, embody the different shades of human collapse in a world that has legalized vengeance. Now, much of the manga happens inside Kano's fractured psyche. He hallucinates enemies, memories, and whole conversations, making you question what's real. And every character is pretty much emotionally dead, trapped in loneliness and trauma. The world is physically decaying, empty streets, gray skies, concrete ruins. It's not a world that has gone mad, but more of a world that's already accepted madness as normal. Higurashi. Higurashi is a very famous manga and anime. You've probably heard about it at some point in time, but it is set in the quiet rural village of Hinamizawa. The story follows Keiichi Maebara, a teenage boy who just moved into town. And at first, everything feels idyllic. Cute girls, a tight-knit community, and summer festivals. What's there not to love? But beneath all of that warmth hides a curse. A history of murders, disappearance, and madness linked to the village deity. And each story arc tells similar events with minor differences. People die, go insane, or vanish. Yet time resets and the pattern repeats. Each arc slowly reveals the truth hiding behind this village's curse, slowly unmasking whether it's supernatural, psychological, or human-made. Now, one thing that a lot of people love and also find terrifying about the manga is that you see characters that you grow to love turn psychotic or murderous, which helps create a deep emotional unease. Every arc explores how isolation, guilt, and fear twist human perception. Characters hallucinate, distrust friends, and commit atrocities believing that they're protecting themselves. And some of the more disturbing scenes involve a person clawing her throat open, or a seemingly kind girl committing ritual murder. And with these stories' time loop structure, it kind of feels like torture. If there's one thing that I can say for certain, it's that every villain has a reason, and every hero eventually breaks. Judge. Judge is a rather interesting manga, because instead of being like a gore fest, it mainly relies on the implication and the setting to really kind of give you the old heebie-jeebies. The story begins when Hiro, a young man burdened with guilt after causing his brother's death in a car accident, is suddenly kidnapped. He wakes up in an abandoned courthouse, chained with 7 other strangers, each wearing an animal mask, symbolizing one of the 7 deadly sins: lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. And they're told by a voice that every few hours they must vote to judge one person to die, until only 4 remain. And as panic sets in, alliances form and shatter, secrets spill out, and it becomes clear that everyone has committed a sin that indirectly led to another person's death or suffering. What makes this manga so disturbing is you can never really know who to trust. The entire fear and paranoia about everyone around you. You could be getting played and you would never know it. The manga leans heavily into emotional cruelty than it does gore or anything else like that, so it is a much different read than a lot of the other ones we've talked about. Flowers of Evil. The Flowers of Evil is a different take on dark and disturbing. The story follows Takao Kasuga, a quiet, bookish middle school boy obsessed with literature, when one day he impulsively steals the gym clothes of Seiki, the girl he idolizes. It's an act of weakness and desire, and someone sees him. That someone is Sawa Nakamura, a strange, volatile classmate who begins to blackmail him. From there, the story becomes a slow, agonizing descent into guilt, humiliation, and sexual confusion. Nakamura forces Takao into increasingly degrading acts, claiming she wants to peel away his mask and expose his true, rotten nature. As Takao's obsession with Seiki curdles into shame, his relationship with Nakamura transforms into a toxic codependency, a mix of hate, fascination, and longing. The series begins to shift from adolescent mischief to existential crisis, exploring how repression and guilt can mutate into self-destruction. The author in the manga portrays puberty and desire not as an innocent awakening, but something else. Takao's guilt over a single impulsive act becomes unbearable, and it's only made worse by Nakamura's relentless taunting. Manga captures how adolescent sexuality can be a very confusing time, and Nakamura in the manga is definitely no help. She is both the villain and a liberator. She humiliates him, forcing him to confront his impulses. Yet, she's the only one who truly sees him. Their relationship blurs the line between abuse, friendship, and emotional intimacy. What all started as a coming-of-age story quickly becomes an existential reckoning. The manga strips away every illusion of purity or normality, leaving only shame, desire, and the need to be seen, even if it destroys you. Hauntress. Hauntress is a rather disturbing manga. What happens when a stalker takes things too far? The story follows a college student, Hiroshi, who lives alone in an apartment complex. When one night he hears the doorbell of his neighbor's unit ringing repeatedly, although no one answers. Eventually he meets a tall, strange woman in a trench coat carrying paper bags, who repeatedly appears and sort of haunts the building. She seems to be desperately trying to find his neighbor. But things soon start to take a turn, when eventually she gets latched on to him, and the woman's attention shifts from his neighbor to Hiroshi. She starts stalking him throughout his day, breaking into his apartment, and behaving like the worst version of a yandere character you could ever imagine. The art style of the manga can be terrifying at points, with how this woman is drawn, and some of the scenes really can make the hair stand up on your skin. And it's not like throughout the manga that the characters are stupid. They make some pretty rash decisions at points. But it seems to all be in vain. There's something different about this stalker. The way she acts and the way she behaves doesn't quite seem normal. This isn't your classical horror manga. You're not going to see blood and gore, but instead obsession, invasion, and an uncertainty. How one simple mistake can immediately turn your life upside down, and how your home, the place that you should feel the most safe, can no longer shelter you. King's Game. Now, what kind of list would this be if King's Game wasn't on here? The manga that took the death game concept and pushed it to the extreme. The story begins with an ordinary high school class of 32 students who receive a mysterious text message from someone calling themselves the King. The message states, all students in class 2-1 must obey the King's orders. You must complete them within 24 hours. Failure equals punishment. And at first, the orders seem harmless. Silly little dares like so-and-so must kiss so-and-so. But soon the orders escalate into humiliation, violence, and murder. The students discover that disobeying or failing a command leads to an immediate, gruesome death. As panic spreads, paranoia and betrayal consumes the class. Nobuaki, the protagonist, tries to uncover who or what the King's Game is, but the game's rules and punishment become more twisted with each round. And the King's punishments are very unpredictable, ranging from hanging, decapitation, to mysterious internal bleeding. And the deaths are drawn with intense realism, emphasizing the shock of seeing teenage characters die in horrific, arbitrary ways. And no one can escape the game. Even trying to flee town, destroy phones, or refuse to participate results in immediate death. You are trapped, and there's no escape. The story goes on to explore how quickly fear erases empathy. Friends execute each other just to survive. Lovers betray one another. And Nobuaki watches helplessly as all those closest to him start to die, often by their own hand or their own choices. King's Game is pretty disturbing because it not only combines the sadism of supernatural death game with the psychological realism of human collapse and the fear of the unknown. What is the King's Game? Who's controlling it? Is there any way out? And in the end, is it even possible for anyone to win? Uzumaki. Uzumaki, or Spiral, is one of Junji Ito's most iconic works. Set in the quiet seaside town of Kurozucho, Uzumaki follows Kiri Goshima and her boyfriend Shuichi Saito, who slowly come to the realization that their town is cursed, not by a ghost or a monster, but by a pattern, the spiral. The spiral begins manifesting everywhere, in clouds, shells, whirlpools, human behavior, and even inside people's bodies. Over time, the townspeople become obsessed, deformed, or devoured by spirals until the town eventually collapses into a grotesque spinning nightmare. What makes the story really terrifying is that there isn't really a villain. It's just a pattern, a natural form that defies all comprehension. People aren't dying because they're attacked. They're dying because the universe itself turned hostile. Some of the more infamous scenes include Shuichi's father, who becomes obsessed with spirals and contorts his body into one, and ultimately spiraling himself to death. Kiri's mother, who is terrified of spirals, mutilates herself, cutting off the tips of her hair, nails, and even parts of her skin to remove anything circular. And at one point, pregnant women even give birth to these snails. And of course, since it's drawn by Junji Ito, you can probably expect how gruesome some of these are going to be. With each chapter that goes by, the town just sinks deeper and deeper into madness. There's no explanation, there's no god or villain, just the inevitability. MPD Psycho. MPD Psycho, or Multiple Personality Detective Psycho, is a manga that started off in the late 90s. The story follows a detective, Yosuke Kobayashi, who is on the case of a serial killer who dismembers his victims. The killer would later go on to send Yosuke his own girlfriend dismembered in a box. This would cause Yosuke to do everything he can to hunt down the killer, but he ends up losing his sanity in the process, giving rise to multiple personalities, including the cold and calculating Kazuhiko Mamiya, who ends up becoming the dominant persona. After being thrown in prison for murdering the killer, he ends up being drawn into a vast web of murders connected to a mysterious organization. MPD Psycho has to have some of the most graphic murder imagery in manga. Corpses are literally turned into living art installations. Victims are mutilated with precision, and their remains are used in twisted symbolism. These murders aren't just done out willy-nilly. These people are dedicated to their murdering hobby. And probably one of the more disturbing aspects is that it kind of echoes things that happened in real life. This mysterious organization uses psychological manipulation, genetic modification, and brainwashing to create killers. Kind of like an echo to the MKUltra program, where the US government was experimenting on its own citizens, not turning them into serial killers, but essentially trying to figure out how to control them. Harems End. Honestly, you could put any manga made by Shintaro Kago here, because they're all pretty messed up. Not saying they're bad, but they're all like this. But Harems End starts off with a college student who suddenly finds himself living with 5 girls representing the typical harem archetypes: an alien, a little sister, a childhood friend, a tsundere, and his fiancé. Meanwhile, a disgraced former idol named Hirahara Aya is offered a role in a mysterious animation company to voice a magical girl series called Killer Maw. And these two stories gradually intertwine, revealing that the harem setup is not just innocent romantic comedy, but a cover for something far more sinister. The girls living with their college student aren't simply vying for his attention. They have much hidden and darker motives. One night after they're all sleeping together, the next thing we know, our main character is dead and all of his limbs are chopped off. The author Kago is known for this kind of style, and Harems End does not hold back. Physical transformations, mutilation, sexual violence, and extremely graphic panels all kind of merge with the harem tropes to make the cute harem girls into horrifying figures. And if you have no idea what you're in for, this one can really throw you for a loop. And like I said, you could honestly put any of his mangas on here because they're all just as disturbing as this one, and some if not more. Hideout. Hideout opens on what looks to be a tropical vacation. A husband and wife driving through an island after a personal tragedy. But the truth unravels pretty quickly. The protagonist, Ichi, is a failed novelist whose life has completely collapsed. His career ruined, his marriage broken, and his young... He leads his wife into the forest under the guise of seeking help, but instead he actually plans to murder her and dispose of the body in a nearby cave. But once inside, things go horrifically wrong. Something else is lurking deeper in the cave. Now what's creepy about this manga is one, not just the art style, but two, the entire premise. The fear of the unknown. Some other monstrous being alone with you in the dark. Now, our main character, Seichi, wasn't a born killer. He was just a man destroyed by disappointment, grief, and emasculation. We watch his transformation from a quiet resentment to homicidal rage. What happens when you push a man too far? And probably the worst part about the story is after learning of Seichi's background, you kind of empathize with him a little bit. He didn't choose this life. It feels like he's being constantly punched down and decides to fight back in his own way. But at the end of the story, there's no redemption. Seichi is not the hero of the story. And it just goes to show you that evil doesn't always come from monsters, but sometimes from the moment you stop caring about what's right. Living Corpse. Hideshi Hino is another one of those authors where you could pick almost any of his manga to put on here because they're all just as disturbing. Again, not saying they're bad, they're all really good, but they all have this same theme. In The Living Corpse, the protagonist is Yosuke Shinkai, a man who awakens with almost no memory of who he is. He wanders through a world where people recoil at his presence, where his body is deteriorating in front of him, and he can't understand why. As he searches for identity, he discovers that he is in fact undead, a corpse kept alive, or living in a state of decay. His flesh rots, his bones crumble, insects emerge, and he is trapped in motion, unable to die properly and unable to live properly. At the same time, he keeps being pulled into memories and revelations about his past, what he once did, the relationships he had, and the betrayal and trauma that led to this state. So not only do you have the complete just terrifyingness of a walking zombie with maggots and stuff falling out of his eyes, you also just have the helplessness of being able to do literally nothing. The rest of your life is done. It's hopelessness. There's no redemption or escape. This is now your life. Battle Royale. In a dystopian Japan, under the totalitarian Republic of Greater East Asia, each year, the government selects one middle school class to participate in a brutal game called The Program. A class of 42 students are drugged, transported to a remote island, and equipped with explosive collars that will detonate if they try to escape, enter forbidden zones, or refuse to play. The students are given random weapons and told that only one of them may survive. Until then, they must kill each other. And the story follows multiple students, especially Shuya Nanahara, Noriko Nakagawa, and Shoga Kawada, as they attempt to survive, resist, forge alliances, betray one another, and confront the horrors of the program. And as the game goes on, violence only escalates, friends become enemies, and each student's backstory and motives are revealed, a lot of them being tragic. Now, not only is this manga a pretty important part of manga history, as it's one of the inspiration for the life-death games that come after it, but it's also the gold standard for death game manga. And it doesn't shy away from showing the death part in death game. It's bloody, gory, and can be very hard to read if you're sensitive to certain things like abuse, SA, murder, manipulation, you name it. It's not like they're grown adults. These are all innocent young kids that are sent out to kill each other. Imagine you and your friend are doing everything to survive, and at the flip of a hat, now you two are enemies. And that's exactly what happens in this manga. Friendships break like that. And as you get to know more students and as more die, you come to learn the reasons behind some of the things that some of these kids do. They all didn't have perfect lives back at home. There was a lot of abuse and trauma that led up to their actions in the manga. So in my opinion, this manga asks one specific question. If survival meant killing a friend, would you be able to? And would you still be able to remain human afterward? Death Sweeper. This manga follows Hiroyuki Ozaki, a man who takes a job as a death sweeper. Someone whose job it is to, can you believe it or not, clean up deaths. Suicides, unattended corpses, and violent crime sprees. At first, Hiroyuki views the work as just a job. Arrive, dispose of the body, clean the environment, erase evidence. But as he continues, each job stays with him. The objects left behind, the memories of the deceased, and the families who never knew or came to terms with the loss. He confronts the horrifying idea that death doesn't always come with recognition or closure. Some people simply vanish, are found days later, and the world moves on. Through his interactions with loved ones of the deceased and the remnants at each scene, Hiroyuki begins to question the meaning of life, death, and legacy, and whether being forgotten is a worse fate than death itself. As the story goes on, the psychological toll starts to mount. The isolation, the guilt, and the sense of being surrounded by death, but powerless to give it meaning. The more scenes he cleans, the more he feels like he's cleaning memories, regrets, and unfulfilled lives rather than just bodies. And that is a pretty strong message. Many of the deaths that he handles are unseen or ignored by society, such as suicides in abandoned houses or corpses found after a long time. It doesn't show you the act, but rather the aftermath, the silent lingering grief and the cold mechanics of removal. His job strips any romantic notion of rest in peace. The deceased often have no farewell, no loved ones, no ceremony. It's just clean it up and wipe it away. Now, while this manga isn't as gore heavy as a lot of other horror manga, it still does leave you with that sense of dread. Scenes of quiet rooms, sheets covering bodies, and empty apartments. Occasionally, the silence can speak louder than words. Fuan no tame. When translated, this manga means Seeds of Anxiety, and that's exactly what you're gonna get reading this. This is an anthology manga, made up of some very, very short horror stories, some only being a couple pages long, that have to deal with everyday people, such as students walking home, families in houses, or friends hanging out, in everyday settings, schools, homes, and neighborhoods, when sudden and unsettling paranormal or psychological disturbances occur, many having to deal with urban legends. And because these are so short, you never get a concrete ending. You don't know what happens. You get a little bit of a build-up, and then your mind is supposed to take care of the rest. One of the chapters that really stuck with me was called Visitors, and it's only a couple pages long, but a girl is just sitting at her desk in her room when she looks outside and sees somebody waving, so she waves back. But then the man waves frantically, and slowly starts to get taller and taller until he can now reach her room. And with that creepy smile, that chapter is done. I don't know about you, but there's something creepy about how they're all just open-ended. You're only left to guess what happened. You don't get to know any of these characters, and the scenarios that they're all in are all way too common. Walking home, looking out your window, or hearing footsteps behind you. And because as you read it, the fears feel plausible, and maybe that's why they stick with you. Pumpkin Night. Pumpkin Night follows Naoko Kirino, a young woman who was bullied in middle school by a group of classmates. After a cruel prank leaves her severely injured, she is institutionalized in a mental hospital, and at some point she adapts the persona of Pumpkin Night, escapes the hospital wearing a pumpkin head mask, and sets out on a brutal, and I mean brutal, revenge spree against her former classmates. Along the way, she murders hospital staff, stalks and terrorizes her targets, and forces them into confrontations of terror and death. And the narrative of the mass killer's rampage is seen as both a direct reaction to all the trauma and bullying that she went through, and also just cold. The loss of innocence. This girl becomes the monster. The victim becomes the terror. Now this manga has plenty of extreme violence. Naoko methodically hunts down those who wronged her, and the violence is very explicit, sudden, and brutal. As Pumpkin Night, she becomes more of a myth than an actual person. And some of the methods that she uses to enact her revenge are pretty brutal. Ichi the Killer. Ichi the Killer is set in the red light district of Shinjuku, Kabukicho, dominated by Yakuza, and the story centers around two key figures. Ichi, a psychologically broken young man, trained to kill. He's timid and weeps when he harms others, but he is capable of extreme violence once triggered. And you also have Kakihara, a sadomasochist Yakuza enforcer who craves pain and inflicts it on others. he becomes obsessed with Ichi's ability to kill. And the whole inciting incident is when the boss of the Ancho clan, a powerful Yakuza gang, disappears with the gang's money. Kakihara insists it's not a disappearance, but a kidnapping. His investigation leads him to a brutal conflict involving Ichi, who is manipulated by an older figure to slaughter for his own psychological ends. And as the plot unfolds, the violence escalates. Torture, massacre, betrayal, body horror, you name it. Neither Ichi nor Kakihara are conventional heroes. They're both very broken and twisted, and manipulated by much larger forces. And the whole line between victim and perpetrator is very, very blurred. Now, this manga doesn't shy from depicting torture whatsoever. Mutilation, dismemberment, SA, you name it. And during all of this, Ichi is having breakdowns. He literally cries after every killing. And there's really no comfort or redemption. The entire time, you're kind of just left with this lingering sense of dread. There's a reason that a lot of people say this is one of the most psychologically jarring mangas that they've ever read. Killing Morph. This story opens up in the busy district of Ikebukuro, where a masked figure, only known as M, commits a brutal, seemingly random mass murder. During the slaughter, a high school girl named Madoka Murasaki and her friends are caught in the middle, and by chance, Madoka survives. Although M is captured and imprisoned, Madoka begins to experience horrifying visions and the growing sense of being stalked. Not just by past events, but by something inside her. She slowly realizes that the massacre may not have ended, and that the killer's influence persists, and that her own body or mind may be morphing under the pressure of trauma and the killer's shadow. Now, the opening murder scene definitely just sets the tone for the rest of this manga, just senseless killing. And the manga isn't just about a serial killer going wild and someone happening to survive it. It's more about the killer's influence and how it's not just physical. It also targets the mind. Madoka and the others are haunted by what they saw and what they survived and what they might possibly become. There's very little comfort in the monster may be inside you, and maybe the scariest part is not the things that we witness, and that the real morphing that we fear is the one we can't stop happening within ourselves. Metamorphosis. Would it even be a list if I didn't include Metamorphosis? Even if you've never read this manga, you've probably seen meme images from it alone. But this tells the story of Saki Yoshida, a shy high school girl who decides she wants to change herself and start living with more confidence. After getting a makeover, she begins to feel noticed and accepted for the first time. And at first, everything's going well. She's going out with friends, enjoying her youth, and discovering independence. Little by little, the new world she's entered becomes darker and darker. People she trusts take advantage of her kindness, and the choices she makes under pressure slowly lead her down a dark and dark path. Now, of course, this is YouTube, so I can't, say everything that happens, but drugs, SA by her father, just a lot, like everything you can imagine happens. It's not good. And even towards the end, it gets pretty dark emotionally as well. As time goes on, Saki's life becomes a reflection of how fragile dreams can be when no one offers real support. The metamorphosis that begins as a symbol of hope turns into something tragic, a loss of innocence and identity. And by the end, Saki realizes how far she's drifted from the person she wanted to be. This manga isn't about shock. It's about the cost of losing yourself in a world that doesn't care. Aiko no maachan. Aiko no maachan is a very disturbing manga, especially if you're a guy. Aiko is a teenage girl who notices that all of her friends around her are undergoing the change of puberty, menstruating and growing up, while she is left behind. She begins to feel anxious and isolated, when one evening, something strange happens. She wakes up and experiences a bizarre event connected to her body's change, which produces a surreal entity or presence named Maachan. Maachan seems to be part of Aiko, and kind of invisible companion or alter ego tied with her transformation into adulthood. And as Aiko tries to navigate school, friends, and her family, she also grapples with Maachan. Her emergence, body changes, and the internal and external expectations of growing up. Now, I can see how this manga, when aimed at the right audience, could be pretty helpful. It could be really useful to young girls going through puberty, But as an adult male, seeing a young girl talk to her maachan is not something that I was expecting to read today. The manga was never meant to be dark or disturbing. It was meant to help young people. Now initially this manga was going to be published on the webcomic Xenon site, but 2 days after the serialization started on June 29th, 2014, and only after the first chapter was made public, the publisher deemed that the content of the manga is possibly unhealthy to be published in Tokyo, and announced to cancel and remove it from the site. And of course, this incident caused a big stir on the internet. And in order to raise enough funds for the series to finish and publish it in a volume format, a crowdfunding project started on August 1st, and it finished on October 15th, exceeding its initial goal. Now there's only a couple chapters that have been translated into English, and like I said, targeted at the right audience, this could be a very helpful manga. But if you are not the target audience and you happen to come across it, watching a little girl talk to that is not something I was wanting to read or was expecting to read. Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show. This manga was really interesting because the entire time I'm reading it, I'm like, there's no way it gets weirder than this, and it does. The story centers on Midori, a young orphaned girl in the Showa era of Japan, and ends up at the traveling carnival run by the titled Mr. Arashi. At the carnival, a freak show of deformed performers, Midori becomes enslaved. She serves the troupe, is abused, humiliated, and watched constantly. The freak show includes twisted performers like a mummified archer, a snake woman, and plenty of other grotesque acts. Midori ends up meeting Masamitsu, a magician in the troupe who takes her on as his assistant and lover, under the guise of protection. As the troupe show becomes more successful, the relationship becomes more toxic. Masamitsu's possessiveness, Midori's isolation, and the carnival's collapse lead to horror and surreal horror events, including the audience themselves being transformed. Mass deformities, betrayal, despair, you name it, this has everything. Ultimately, the story ends kinda bleak. The freak show dissolves, Midori loses her hope, and the carnival's nightmarish effects linger in her psyche. So not only does this manga have extreme exploitation of a very, very vulnerable child, there's also plenty of body horror and freak show imagery. And as you read it, just when you think you've finally seen the most disturbing thing ever, somehow this manga just keeps managing to one-up itself. Shin National Kid. Shin National Kid is just a collection of short stories by Suhiro Maru that loosely have some tie-ins to themes of war, but are mainly just eroticism, gore, and just randomness. Like seriously, I read the entire thing and I couldn't begin to tell you what any of these stories were about. It seems like the manga creator was just like, hey, how can I make the most weird and disturbing manga as possible? Like, I'm not even joking. One of the chapters is about Michael Jackson. He hits people with a baseball bat and then he spins in circles so fast he explodes. And it was like 3 pages long. You could try to figure out what that means because I have no idea. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad manga or anything. I was entertained at just the complete wacky and randomness, but I could not understand any of the story whatsoever. So if you like something that's completely random, disturbing, boobs, gore, and just a whole lot of stuff that makes no sense, but it's entertaining, then this is a really good manga for you. U12. U12, or Under 12, is a manga that I don't even want to talk about. I feel like just mentioning it is going to have the FBI bursting down my door, and the fact that I had to Google this and figure out what it was about is probably put me on a list. But anyway, U12 begins with 12 young girls, each under the age of, what do you guess it, 12, being kidnapped and imprisoned in a mysterious facility. They're stripped of their rights, placed under harsh and inhumane conditions, and forced into survival games and party games that have a strong hint of SA, which are all organized by their captors. The girls must navigate life and death challenges, forced compliance, and escape attempts, all while they try to preserve their humanity in a system designed to dehumanize them. Again, they are all younger than 12. As they fight through the prison's twisted rules, they uncover more about why they were taken and what purpose their imprisonment is, and who orchestrated it. So not only do we have young children, we have violence and SA and pedophiles running around. This is not a manga I would recommend to anyone. Don't even have this search in your history. Any manga called Under 12 with a tag of SA and lolly is something that I probably don't want to be anywhere near. So whether the creator was trying to combine a real story with a depiction of pedophiles, and I don't know. I just give up. Humanity is doomed. 17 Sai. Now, depending on who you ask, 17 Sai can be one of the most messed up mangas you have ever read, or a heartfelt tribute. 17 Sai is based off the very real kidnapping, essay, and murder of Junko Furuta, whose murder was known as the concrete encased high school girl. Back in the late 1980s, this poor girl was kidnapped and held for over 40 days, where every day she was beaten, essayed, and made to suffer by various forms of torture, until eventually she was killed, and her body was put in a barrel and filled with concrete. And this manga, 17 Sai, depicts all of it. Well, not all of it. The things that actually happened to this poor girl in real life were much worse than what happens in this manga. And like I said, some people see this as a nice tribute to the actual case, spreading awareness as to what happened, but other people probably see it for what it is. A way to make money off of some girl's poor death. It essentially fetishizes everything that happened to her, and the story's point of view is not told through the victim, but through one of the culprits, which causes the reader to take at least an ounce of pity on the man. In the ending of the manga, she gets saved, but that was not the case in real life. So if you were to ask me, someone who has read up on the case and knows everything that poor woman went through, I would say that this is one of the worst mangas to have ever been made. I mean, not even 20 years went by before people were trying to profit off of the horrible experience that this girl went through.